Thank you for joining us for this special presentation. My name is Rachel Morey, and I'm the Director of Exceptional Student Education for the School District of Indian River County. And I am so excited to be sharing with you a very valuable resource. We have an ESE Frequently Asked Questions Expert Roundtable. So with that, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Program Specialist, Kat Wolf.
Hi, thanks so much for joining us. We are going to ask our panel to share some answers to some frequently asked questions that we hear from families, community members, and even staff. And we are going to first start out with asking them to introduce themselves with their name and their individual role at their schools. We'll start with Mr. Jay Mistretta.
Hey, I'm Jay Mistretta. I am a resource specialist at Pelican Island Elementary.
I'm Leo Volbracht. I'm the teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing for the district.
Tracy Magoo, Program Specialist for Psychological Services and a school psychologist.
Tabitha Johnston, I'm the resource specialist for Wabasso, the center school, and also Indian River Virtual School.
I'm Jill Robb. I'm an ESE behavior analyst in the school district.
Jessica Rojas, ESE Program Specialist, and specialize in working with students with emotional and behavioral disabilities.
Andrea Delph Prince, occupational therapist for the school district.
I'm Marcy Wong. I'm a speech language pathologist for the school district.
All right, and we'll get started with our first question. From a parent's perspective, who do I contact at the school if I have concerns?
You would contact the resource specialist, administration, or school psychologist. You can find that information on the school's website.
Thanks, Jay. Next question. Which communication modalities are supported in schools? If my student has a hearing impairment, can they still go to school?
So the answer to the first part of the question is all. We support all communication modalities. And the answer to the second question is yes, any student with a hearing impairment can be supported within our school district.
Thank you, Mr. Volbrecht. The next question is regarding assistive technology. What assistive technology is provided for students, and how is that AT assigned to students?
Well, assistive technology is assigned to students based on IEP team data and decision making. Each IEP team looks at the needs of particular students and determines what they might need. Now, any member of that IEP team can ask for an AT screening or an evaluation done by a local assistive technology specialist in the county. And that evaluation is done with the support of that person by the IEP team.
Thank you, Marcy. The next question.
Occupational therapy and physical therapy will also support the AT team doing seating accommodations as well as ability to access the equipment.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Next question. Will my student have access to electives and extracurricular activities if they have a disability?
Absolutely. All students are included and encouraged to participate in whatever extracurricular activity they are interested in. They can also participate in electives during the school day, regardless of their placement.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Next question. Can the school district help my student with private services?
Your school team can provide resources related to private services providers in the community.
And next, can my private providers come to campus to serve my student?
Absolutely. But the specific time of day, the location, frequency is really determined by the school-based administration. It's important to know that whatever is on the IEP still must be serviced by the school-based team, not the outside private provider.
Thanks, Jill.
You're welcome.
All right, our next question. Who's allowed to attend IEP meetings with me? Can I bring my family member, an advocate, a private provider, or a friend?
Absolutely. Parents can bring whomever they would like. We just ask that if you're able to, that you indicate it on your meeting notice. That's not required, but it always helps us to know who's coming and who to be prepared for.
Thanks, Tracy. Next question. Are services provided for students during the summer?
That would be. For students with disabilities, some of them will be provided extended school year services that happen during the summer. Again, this is an IEP team data-driven decision as to whether or not that student is in need of those summer services. Students without disabilities, there are some summer programs at some schools, and you would need to ask your specific school what they're planning for this summer, if anything.
Thank you. Are students with disabilities assessed on the same standards as students without disabilities?
Yes, the majority of students in public schools receive instruction via Florida Standards and participate in the Florida Standards Assessment, which is the FSA. There is a small percentage of students that receive instruction via access points, and then they're tested on the FSAA. But regardless of whether they're tested on the FSA or the FSAA, it's imperative that educators and families hold high expectations for all students, focusing on the students' abilities and providing supports as needed to help maintain a high bar for achievement for all of our students in Indian River County.
Thank you. How are accommodations determined for my student?
Accommodations are determined by the IEP team on a student need basis as well as a data-driven approach. Members of the IEP team meet together to determine what data is required and what accommodations may be needed. That data is collected, and then it's determined by the IEP team whether or not those accommodations are needed to be put on the IEP.
Thanks. Speaking of accommodations, what's the difference between an accommodation and a modification?
So this is a question that we get asked a lot, and it really can be kind of confusing. An accommodation literally changes how a child learns. For example, if you have a child who needs, let's say, a reduction, extended test taking time, or a reduction in the amount of work that they receive, whereas a modification changes what a child is actually learning. So we have something called access points, which is a modified version of our standards. It reduces the complexity of what the child's actually learning. It's important to know that only children who are on access points and taking the FSAA, we can modify what they're learning. All other children, we cannot modify what they're learning. We can only accommodate how they're learning.
Thank you, Jess. How often are IEPs reviewed and updated?
IEPs are reviewed at least annually, but any team member can request to meet sooner to review progress. And then 3-year reevaluations obviously happen every 3 years.
Thank you. What's the difference between an IEP and a 504?
So Section 504 falls under Americans with Disability Act and the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Any child who is suspected of, regarded as having, or has a disability is protected. 504 can be a little bit complicated because just because a child has a disability, they are automatically protected from discrimination. However, it does not mean that they necessarily need an accommodation plan. So that's something that is decided by the team. Students with an IEP, that falls under IDEA, and the real main difference is they require specially designed instruction to be able to really benefit and be successful. And this instruction comes from certified ESE teachers.
Thank you. Will my student be able to graduate with a regular diploma if they have an IEP?
Yes, almost all students graduating from public schools are eligible for a standard diploma, and only a very small percentage receive a special diploma. Students participating in instruction in Florida Standards and Florida Standard Access Points are eligible for a standard diploma upon completing all graduation requirements. And then a standard diploma earned via instruction and access points may have some limitations, so it's very important for families to carefully consider and discuss with their IEP team.
Thank you. If my child has an outside evaluation, are they qualified for an IEP?
So private evaluations can also be provided to the school by the parents. However, it doesn't always fulfill the requirements we need for an evaluation. So what we do as a school team is we will consider the private evaluation, taking in any data that was provided, and look at if a student meets criteria under the IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. However, as I mentioned before, with a private evaluation, they have certain criteria that they use. However, the school system and the state have other specific criteria, and sometimes we might need to supplement the evaluation with additional information. We might need to do some other interventions and whatnot to make sure that we're looking at the whole child and addressing any areas of concern.
Thank you. I think Andrea wants to add some to that answer.
Thank you. So occupational therapy and physical therapy evaluations, we follow the same criteria. However, one of the things that the community needs to remember is that in the school setting, OT and PT, our mandate is a little bit different. We are mandated to assist with education. A lot of the skills may overlap with a community provider. However, our first and foremost goal is to make sure that that student has access to their education, so that a goal that a private provider might be working on may not necessarily be worked on in the school setting, simply because it does not affect that child's educational access.
Thank you for clarifying that, Andrea. All right, our next question. How do I request an evaluation for my student?
So if you have concern about the presence of a disability, you're going to contact either your school-based administrator or your school-based resource specialist, who can kind of help you figure out who you need to speak to and what the next steps would be.
Thank you. How does my student request accommodations that might be on their IEP or 504 plan?
So once a student understands the accommodations on their IEP or their 504 plan, of course, what we really strive for is that the student is able to self-advocate for themselves and request those accommodations on their own in situations where they may need them. But we have to recognize that as a school district, we service students of all ages, and so at the early ages, it's the job of the teacher and the special ed department to make sure that those accommodations are being fulfilled on the IEP, and then working with the student in order to help them understand what those accommodations do, why they have them, and then how to self-advocate for them. If a student is struggling to advocate for their own accommodations because of their disability, IEP teams can add additional goals to their IEP to help with working on that skill for self-advocacy.
Thank you so much. Our final question for today is, how do students meet eligibility for an IEP?
Okay, so the Florida Department of Education outlines eligibility criteria for each specific disability category. Okay, and each of those eligibility categories are in the Florida Administrative Code and reviewed. You can always go to the Florida DOE website and see what the actual specific criteria is. Now, when you're referring a student for evaluation, we're going to always go through the school-based problem-solving team. So these teams are a multidisciplinary team that are really there to determine what appropriate interventions there might be and how we can help move your student to the next level. So this is going to be a team of individuals who look at various interventions and how we can close that gap. It's going to look at things like defining the problem area, appropriate interventions, and then also progress monitoring to see how the student is progressing. Based upon that data, we might move forward to an eligibility. We might look at changing the intervention. We might look at pulling back intervention. Maybe the student's doing really well. So we look at all those things through that problem-solving model. But if it is warranted, the team also can look at moving forward with what we refer to as an IDEA eligibility, going under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act.
Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you so much for joining us today for our frequently asked questions session. If you have additional questions, or if what we talked about today spurred more questions for you, please don't hesitate to reach out to your school-based team, your administration, your resource specialist, school psychologist, therapy staff. We all want to work with our families and community members to elevate ESE in the School District of Indian River County. Thank you.